The Kentucky man who woke up speaking French. In June of 2017, a man went to sleep in his Kentucky farmhouse as an ordinary American. He woke up speaking a language he had never studied, and the English he had spoken for his entire life was completely gone. This is not fiction. This is not a creepypasta. This is the documented medical case of a man who woke up French. What happened inside his brain that night remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in modern neurology. And the questions it raises are far stranger than the event itself. Can a person truly forget who they are? Can identity be rewritten in a single moment? And what would you do if the voice in your head suddenly wasn't yours anymore? Let's find out. The story begins quietly, like most strange things do. A man in his early 60s lived alone on a modest piece of land in rural Kentucky. His neighbors described him as friendly but reserved. A simple man. He had worked with his hands most of his life. He never traveled outside the United States. He had never been to France. He had never taken a French class. His exposure to the language was zero. On the evening of June 12th, he went to bed feeling normal. No headache. No illness, no indication that anything was wrong inside his skull. The next morning, everything had changed. When he woke up, he tried to speak. But the words that came out of his mouth were not English. They were French. Fluent, unaccented, perfect Parisian French. At first, he must have thought he was still dreaming. Imagine opening your mouth to say good morning and hearing words you don't recognize come from your own throat. Imagine thinking in English but being physically unable to form the sounds. He panicked. He tried again. And again. Nothing but French. A neighbor found him later that day, disoriented and visibly terrified. He was trying to communicate but couldn't. The neighbor spoke no French. Nobody in that small Kentucky town did. Eventually, someone called an ambulance, and that's when the case became medical history. At the hospital, doctors were baffled. The man could not understand simple English commands. When a nurse asked him to raise his hand, he stared blankly. But when a French interpreter was brought in and asked the same question in French, he responded immediately. The doctors ran every test available: MRI scans, CT scans, blood work, neurological assessments. What they found was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The man's brain showed no signs of stroke, no tumors, no physical trauma, no evidence of a seizure, nothing that would normally explain a sudden and complete loss of language function. But it was there. English was gone. French remained. And here is where it gets even stranger. The French he spoke was not broken. It was not the French of someone who had picked up a few phrases from a phrasebook. It was academically structured, grammatically correct, the kind of French spoken by someone educated in France. And yet, this man had never left Kentucky. So where did it come from? Doctors and researchers began digging into his past. They interviewed family members. They checked old-school records. They searched for any possible exposure to the French language. What they found was minimal. He had briefly heard some French as a small child. His grandmother used to sing a French lullaby when he was 3 years old, and in high school decades ago, he had sat through a few weeks of basic French instruction. He had failed the class. That was it. Somehow, somewhere deep in his brain, those fragments had been stored. And on that June night, they were unlocked. Not just unlocked. They were amplified into fluency. The medical term for this phenomenon is remarkably rare. It is called foreign accent syndrome. But this case was extreme. Most patients simply speak their native language with a different accent. What happened in Kentucky was something far more profound. A complete language switch. A total linguistic replacement. Cases like this have been recorded only a handful of times in human history. In 2010, a Croatian girl woke up from a coma speaking fluent German. Her family spoke only Croatian. The German had apparently been absorbed from television shows. In 2016, an Australian man woke up after a car accident speaking Mandarin. He had studied it briefly in university, but had never been fluent. After the accident, he could not speak English for days. And in World War I, a German soldier was found wandering behind enemy lines speaking fluent French. He had no memory of his German identity. He had essentially become a different person. These cases all point to one terrifying possibility that neuroscience is only beginning to understand. The brain does not simply store information like a hard drive. It curates, it hides, it buries things so deep that even we do not know they exist. And under the right conditions, those hidden things can surface and take over. What happened inside the Kentucky man's head that June night will probably never be fully understood. But there are theories. Some neurologists believe that during deep sleep, his brain underwent a rare form of neural reorganization, a glitch in the pruning process. Imagine a library where every English book was accidentally removed from the shelves, while every French book, previously locked in the basement, was brought upstairs and displayed. The English wasn't destroyed, it was just inaccessible. The French wasn't learned. It was simply exposed. Another theory is more disturbing. It suggests that identity itself is far more fragile than we believe, that the self we think is solid is actually a delicate balance of active neural networks, and if something tips that balance, a new self can emerge from the wreckage. The Kentucky man spent several weeks in medical care. Slowly, painfully, his English began to return. It started with single words: water, home, tired. Then simple sentences, then full conversations. But something had changed permanently. He reported that even after his English came back, he would sometimes think in French, dream in French. In moments of high emotion, French words would slip out before English ones. It was as if his brain had made room for two people, and the second one was not leaving. Today, the man is mostly recovered. He lives a quiet life. He does not give interviews. He does not seek attention. But what happened to him remains a landmark case in the study of the human mind, and it forces us to ask questions that are deeply uncomfortable. What else is buried inside your brain right now? What languages? What memories? What versions of yourself are locked away in neural basements, waiting for the right trigger to surface? Maybe the answer is nothing. Maybe most of us live our entire lives as one continuous self, untouched by the strange possibilities that lurk beneath the surface. But then again, maybe not. Maybe somewhere tonight, someone will go to sleep as one person and wake up as another. It happened in Kentucky, and if it happened once, it can happen again. Sleep well.